So this video is going to talk about Aristophanes' Lysistrata, which is probably the most famous surviving ancient Greek comedy. The basic plot line of Lysistrata is that there's been a war going on in Greece, the Peloponnesian War, and the women of Greece have had enough of it. They miss their husbands, they are tired of being left at home, they're tired of people dying, they don't care about the glorious martial causes for which men are going to war. And so they decide, at basically the prompting of Lysistrata, who's the protagonist of the play, they decide to end the war. And the way that they decide to end the war is through a sex strike. So basically, all of the women of Greece agree that they are not going to have sex with the men until the men agree to stop the war. And basically it works in about a week. But it's a very interesting comedy because on the one hand there's a lot of sort of bawdy humor about women's sexual desire and husbands being cuckolded and men trying to hide their erections that last longer than 4 hours, and so on and so on. So we've got a lot of this very sort of smutty humor that does still work for us today. But one of the things that is sort of lost in translation from an ancient Greek context to a contemporary context, especially a contemporary Western context, North America, Europe, etc., is the absurdity of women having political, military, or economic power. So in ancient Greece, especially in a city like Athens, in some cities there was a bit more gender equity, like Sparta seems to be more gender equitable, but in Athens it seems fairly clear that women had no political role, with a few possible exceptions of like high-ranking priestesses and things like this. But for the most part, the average woman was not a citizen, did not own property, had no political voice in the ecclesia or the agora, had no economic power, had no independent rights of her own. And so for that audience of probably mostly men, this is another area where scholars disagree about whether or not women were likely allowed into the theaters, especially for something like the city Dionysia. So it's not clear whether or not women would have even seen this play or whether this just would have been men. But the idea that women could organize politically, the idea that women could take over the Acropolis, the idea that women could defeat men, was this sort of bizarre, outlandish notion that had no reflection in the reality of contemporary politics. And so for Aristophanes' audience, that was probably not necessarily like slapstick funny, but it was probably a sort of political satire type funny. So we've got here a number of things where we see this very directly. Like at one point when Lysistrata is convincing these other women to join her in this sex strike, she says, I've thought the whole thing out till there's no flaw. We shall surprise the Acropolis today. That is the duty of the older dames. While we sit here talking, they are to go, and under pretense of sacrificing, seize it. So the old women, this chorus of old women, go to the Acropolis and kick the guards out and basically take over and fortify the Acropolis. And shortly after that, this chorus of old men comes to try and burn them out, basically. And it's a mock battle in which the chorus of old women prevail by dumping stagnant water onto the torches and then onto the old men themselves. So these old men who sort of come up and they're all like, we are men and we will burn the women out of the Acropolis and beat them up to teach them a lesson. Basically, they end up sort of drenched in stagnant water, shivering and feeling ridiculous. Then the magistrate comes up with a bunch of soldiers, basically, and he tries to get the women out. And by this time, Lysistrata and the others from the first scene have shown up. And basically, they fight the guards. They punch them, they scratch them, they kick them, whatever it is, and they win. Like, they drive the magistrate and the guards away from the Acropolis. And so we've got these sort of two instances where Greek men, Greek soldiers or former soldiers, in the case of the chorus of the old men, are defeated by women who've taken over the Acropolis, which is one of the most important sites in the city, one of the sort of centers of government and where the treasury is housed. So the women actually take basically all of the money in Athens, and they say, no money for you, no sex for you, until you make peace. So this is one of the components that, for a Greek audience or for an Athenian audience specifically, who didn't sort of conceptualize women as political actors, that would have been this sort of absurd twist that Aristophanes is putting on things. The other component of this that's really important in the context of Greek democracy, or Athenian democracy, is that the women make political speeches, especially Lysistrata. And so a lot of scholars, a lot of classicists, have made the connection between Greek tragedy or Greek comedy and I blanked on the word, the Greek concept for freedom of speech, or the right to speak publicly, which was central to democracy. Democracy was built, in a way, on rhetoric. So the ability to persuade other people to agree with you. And so one of the things that we've got in Lysistrata is these really important, compelling speeches that she gives, especially when the Spartans and the Athenians have both sent delegates to sue for peace. So she gives this speech, for instance, to the Spartans. So the chorus says, "The foremost men of Hellas, smitten by your fascination, have brought their tangled quarrels here for your sole arbitration." And Lysistrata, so in other words, she's now in charge. And Lysistrata gets to set the terms of the peace. And so what she says, in her first speech here in this peacemaking process is, "An easy task if their love's raging homesickness doesn't start trying out how well each other will serve instead of us." So basically, if the men don't start having sex with each other rather than the women, I can solve this easily. But I'll know at once if they do. Oh, where's that girl reconciliation? Bring first before me the Spartan delegates, and see you lift no rude or violent hands, none of the churlish ways our husbands used. But lead them courteously, as women should. This is addressing the chorus of old women, by the way, instructing them how to bring the Spartan and Athenian delegates before her. But lead them courteously, as women should, and if they grudge fingers, catch what's a better handle, and introduce them with ready tact. The Athenians draw by whatever offers you a grip. Again. Now, Spartans, stay here facing me. Here, you Athenians, both hearken to my words. I am but a woman, and I'm not a fool. And what of natural intelligence I own has been filled out with the remembered precepts my father and the city elders taught me. First, I reproach you both sides equally, that when at Pylae and Olympia, at Pytho and many other shrines that I could name, you sprinkle from one cup the altars common to all Hellenes. Yet you rack Hellenic cities, bloody Hellas, with the deaths of her own sons, while yonder clangs the gathering menace of barbarians. So, Lysistrata urges them to think of Greece as a whole, which is, it's an interesting rhetorical technique, because the question of how much Greece was a united region is really open to debate. Like, there are times when ancient Greeks are very clearly making appeals to Greek nationalism, especially when they're threatened with invasion by the Persians, for instance. But on the whole, the Greeks are not really a united nation. They are a set of independent city-states or semi-independent city-states. A lot of them are under the control of major powers. So a lot of smaller city-states are under the control of Athens or of Sparta or of Thebes or Corinth or whatever it is at a particular time. So the appeal to this kind of unified Greek nationalism, it's not without basis, because again, like when the Persians threaten to invade and conquer Greece, there are these sort of calls for pan-Hellenic solidarity, but fundamentally Greece is not unified at this point. And so Lysistrata makes this sort of interesting appeal where she says, think of Greece as a unified country and stop fighting amongst ourselves. Athens and Sparta need to stop fighting one another, and then everything will be good, and you'll all get to have sex with us again. So again, we've got those sort of rude jokes where she tells the chorus of women, grab them by their erect penises and lead them here if you need to. But we've also got this sort of satiric or bizarre political idea that women could have a voice in public policy. They could have a voice in military policy. They could have a voice in economic policy, and so on and so on. And so for Aristophanes' audience, that would have been very, very much unfamiliar, very much probably unsettling. And so that's an important cultural difference between their moment and ours.